The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. As parents, we worry about our kids. Are they safe? Are they happy? Will they be okay? It's just par for the course. Our job is to worry. But for the parents and families of Abby Williams and Libby German, their concerns are much different. Abby and Libby are the victims of a brutal, violent double murder. The case gained nationwide attention and became known as the Delphi murders. The girls were killed back in 2017. It took 5 years for a suspect to be arrested. His name is Richard Allen. But since his arrest, the case has actually gotten much more complicated. Allegations of a ritualistic killing, leaked crime scene photos, and even more drama inside the courtroom involving the judge and the lawyers. I've been covering the story in my weeknight show, Closing Arguments, and what you're about to see are some of the most important moments from that program as I investigate the Delphi murders while the families wait for justice. It was an unseasonably warm February day in 2017 in the small rural town of Delphi, Indiana. It's not a place where you worry when your teenage kids decide to go on an adventure. So when Abby Williams and her best friend Libby German decided to go on a hike near the Monon High Bridge in the middle of the day, no one thought it was dangerous. But when Libby and Abby did not show up when they were supposed to get picked up, their families began to worry, and they began to search. Then, the next day, the worst possible news. The bodies of these two young girls were found, both victims of murder. As the investigation progressed over 5 years, there were sketches of the suspect that looked like two completely different people. And there was video of the killer. Then, finally, an arrest of the accused murderer, Richard Allen. Allen says he didn't do it, and he also alleges it was a group of Odinites who were responsible, white nationalists practicing the ancient Nordic religion. This case has also been buried in legal controversy, resulting in a trip to the Indiana Supreme Court and major rulings involving the evidence. Tonight, we take a look at all the latest. Then, we return to the crime scene where both young victims had been undressed. But was this a sex crime? If not, why were the clothes removed? We'll bring in our experts as we continue our investigation of the Delphi murders. Thank you, everyone, for being here. All right, Anya and Kevin, let me start here with the reinstatement. I want to handle that first. They're back in. Are there any limitations on what they can do? Do we know the reaction to the Supreme Court's decision here from the folks involved, including the judge?
At this point, basically, all we know is that they're back because the Supreme Court issued an order to that effect, but they have not issued their opinion in which they explain their reasoning. So we don't know why they have decided to bring the attorneys back. Is it because they feel that the trial judge in this case, Frangel, simply did not have the right to remove the defense attorneys under any circumstances? Or do they believe that she did indeed have that right, but she just happened to go about it in the incorrect way? So it's really difficult to know what's going to happen next until we understand why exactly the Supreme Court made the decision it did.
Also, in terms of reactions, I don't necessarily think we know, but I mean, we can all imagine this seems pretty awkward, right? Everyone stays on. I think this is an outcome that not many saw coming. I think people saw the defense attorneys coming back potentially. I don't know if we all saw that it was going to be everyone resume the status quo and work together, or maybe try to get each other knocked off in a different way.
It's unreal, right? Because they wanted the judge removed, but the judge is not removed. That's denied.
They wanted to start the trial in 70 days. That's not happening, so it'll be in the fall. Bob Motta, your reaction to these decisions where the whole crew, the whole cast is back in place where we were originally trying to begin this trial this month, but now it's going to be in the fall. Will it be a little awkward?
Yeah, of course. There's nothing more uncomfortable than trying a case in front of a judge that seems to hate you. It's a tough road to hoe as a defense attorney. I can tell you from experience. Yeah, it's unusual. I actually kind of thought it was going to go down this way after the hearing. You know, I was sitting in there. It seemed apparent to me that they were going to reinstate Baldwin and Rosie, and I did not get the sense that they were going to remove Gall at all because they didn't discuss it at all. Not really. It didn't come up one time during the entire hearing. The judge had a pretty definitive order come out where she denied a lot of substantial motions without the benefit of having a hearing, which was kind of the point of what we were in front of the Supreme Court arguing about. She should have had a hearing if she wanted to remove Baldwin and Rosie. So a lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. It was let's take a look first to let everyone know. One of the issues in front of the court was a Franks hearing. They're trying to get some evidence against Richard Allen, suppressed, thrown out, not admitted. Let's take a look so you understand what we're talking about. In the memorandum in support of the accused motion for a Franks hearing, to have an actual hearing on this, some of the information in there was that members of a pagan religion called Odinism ritualistically sacrificed Abby Williams and Libby German. Law enforcement working on the Delphi murder investigation pursued leads in connection to Odinism. Sheriff Tony Liggett failed to include all of this Odinite information in his affidavit for the search warrant. So they're trying to say that the sheriff was not being upfront or being truthful and honest in the application for the search warrant of Richard Allen's home. Sheriff Liggett concealed and fabricated statements in his search warrant that devastate his timeline against Richard Allen. Odinite corrections officers in leadership have been positioned to watch, guard, and intimidate Richard Allen. Yeah, he was transferred to a place where apparently some of the officers practiced this Odinism. They believe the killers practiced this Odinism, and then the people who were watching him practiced this Odinism. Then the court denied it. Let's take a look at that. The court finds the affidavit submitted in support of the issuance of the search warrant contained information that a reasonable belief existed that evidence of the murders would be found in the defendant Richard Allen's home and vehicles. The court does not find that the affidavit submitted false statements or that the affiant omitted statements with reckless disregard, nor does the court find that the affiant intended to mislead the judge by failing to present information. All right, Anya and Kevin, I know you've been through all these papers. What is your takeaway from what the defense was looking to do and what the judge did?
Well, basically what the defense was trying to do was trying to get some devastating evidence against Richard Allen removed from consideration, removed from being seen by a jury. That's just good strategy. And I understand now there are people out there who are trying to suggest that perhaps Judge Gold did something wrong or improper by denying a hearing. But of course, just because an attorney writes a motion requesting a hearing on a particular matter doesn't mean a judge is obligated to grant that. And I think it's also important to note that also we should look not just at how Judge Gold ruled, but how would another judge be expected to rule on these motions. And here in the state of Indiana, it's extraordinarily difficult to get a trial judge to throw out a search warrant. I know, for instance, there was indeed a case within the last year where Andrew Baldwin, one of the attorneys on this case, was able to get a search warrant thrown out, but then subsequently a court of appeal said, no, the search warrant is in. It's just very, very difficult to get a search warrant thrown out. And so I wasn't terribly surprised by the judge's ruling.
Coming up next.
They found no trace whatsoever of Allen having any contact with either the girls or any kind of odiness of any kind. And that's a big deal, you know, because you have to try to figure out how Richard Allen ended up out at that bridge.
TV podcast.
Usually the most complicated part of a murder case is gathering the evidence, examining the forensics, and trying to piece together what happened. That's true here in the Delphi murder case, but what has been equally complicated is the legal battle inside the courtroom. Here, we take a closer look at both. Well, let's take a look at the judge's other rulings and some of the evidence that we're talking about here that they're trying to get tossed out that they found. So he denied the motion to suppress the fruits of the search of Richard Allen's home, right? Denied the defendant's motion in limine regarding ballistics in this case. And there's a defendant motion to transfer that's under advisement, but it's the search and the ballistics that are really key here. Take a look at the search warrant return. This is what they found. Richard Allen's home. One black Sig Sauer Pig P226 40 caliber handgun. 40 caliber cartridge from a keepsake box. 40 caliber cartridge from inside the Sig Sauer. 2 magazines containing 40 caliber cartridges. Multiple sweatshirts, jackets, hats, gloves, boots. Numerous knives, multi-tools, laptops, hard drives, flash drives, cell phones. Cutting of carpeted area underneath the spare tire of a Ford Focus. Swabs of the driver lap belt. 2 swabs to the passenger side of the carpeted flat floorboards. Okay, Bob Motta, here's my point here. They're trying to get this stuff suppressed, right? I understand that's very standard. But they're also alleging that he didn't do it. Not that they can't prove that he did it. They're literally saying he did not do it, and we know who did it. So this shouldn't be a big deal, should it? Any of the things that they got at his house, if he's not the killer?
Yeah, look, I mean, they definitely are of the position that Allen is actually innocent. No question about that. In terms of an appellate record, and I want to address what Kevin was saying, the best practice is to have a hearing, whether she's certainly not obligated to do it, but we have a record, an appellate record that is in shambles as of this point right now. For her to come out and do this without a hearing and to put a minute order citing no case law and verily any kind of rationale as to her reasoning is just adding fuel to the fire.
I got you, and that was one of my points, right? You don't want a botched trial. You don't want a trial where you get a conviction and then you've got to go back and do it again because there were mistakes made along the way. But let me ask you, though, 100%. Bob, and to me this is a big point. I'm going to ask Anya and Kevin about this as well. And I understand defense attorneys have to do what they have to do, right? They're gonna do everything they can to represent their clients vigorously. That's what our system demands of them. However, if we take them at their word that he's innocent, then why would anything that they got from his house matter? And I'll start with Bob. Well, why would it matter? Okay. Right? If he didn't do it, then there's not evidence that he did do it at his home. So whatever, the fruit of what? What's the problem with the fruit?
That's a great point, and I think it's true. I don't know that the defense is overly concerned with it because, frankly, Vinny, when I look at that list, I'd hazard to guess that a majority of Indiana residents have all those things in their homes. None of those scream smoking gun to me. Now, obviously, they're going to do forensic testing on various things. I mean, we know from the memo itself, if we're to believe the defense, and I have no reason not to, that they found no trace whatsoever of Allen having any contact with either the girls or any kind of oddness of any kind. And that's a big deal, you know, because you have to try to figure out how Richard Allen ended up out at that bridge. Did he just go out there randomly and just ran into Abby and Libby randomly, or were they drawn out to that bridge? So, I mean, it's been one of the big mysteries about this case for a long time. So I don't know that they are worried about it, but they certainly had to file the motions.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Suppress.
So yeah. That's fair. Maybe they're not worried about it. All right, so I have one other point, though. Let me ask you this, Anya and Kevin. This defense motion for a transfer where they're trying to get him transferred from the facility that he's being held in somewhere else. He's being held in prison, which is very unusual pre-trial. But one of the big issues that they're citing is that the guards are odorless, and they had these patches. And then apparently one of the guards had to take the patch off and then got a face tattoo? Is that what's going on? Like, what is that?
Yeah, no one really expected face tattoos to be a super relevant thing here. But certainly the symbols of heathenry have been certainly discussed widely in this. And it sounds like there are some guards that are at the very least heathens in this prison. And the difference between Odinists and heathens, of course, are they all worship essentially the same gods. The Odinists are a white supremacist criminal gang who are violent. Heathens are just like people who worship Odin, right? They're all right. So it's not clear to me whether we're talking about guards who are Odinists, which is so concerning for reasons beyond just this case because it's white supremacist, right? And people who are heathen.
Still to come.
Psychotic conditions ebb and flow. And there are people who, you know, have a marginal lifestyle. They hold it together to some degree, but they have a very disturbed thought life. And sometimes they hide that from other people.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Why were these two young girls targeted? Why did the killer or killers go after Abby and Libby? Was this a sex crime or was it something else? I asked our power panel of experts, Joseph Scott Morgan, Shavaun Scott, and Chris Todd. Okay, Chris, I'll start with you. You know a lot about this crime scene. Is this, from your perspective, the scene of a sex crime?
Absolutely.
In what respect? Now, there's been no charges, so explain why.
Well, we find one girl unclothed, correct, and the other girl is wearing her clothes, so indicating that Abby was unclothed at one time. And I've stated this in my book, and I've stated this with other interviews. I don't believe the girls were actually killed where they were found. And even in the Frank's motion, they lay out some of the blood evidence that there's not a lot of blood on the clothing that Abby's wearing. I believe both girls were murdered while they were unclothed.
Joseph Scott Morgan, do you see this as the scene of it's a murder scene, obviously, but also the scene of a sex crime?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. When you've got two girls whose clothing has been manipulated in this manner, yeah, I would say that. Here's my big thing, Vin. With the examination, I can almost guarantee you that there have been rape kits that were performed. Now, did they come back negative? Also, any swabbings that were on the bodies, particularly looking for any kind of biological deposition on the bodies. That's one of the things that you can see when you have an individual that is a sexual sadist, where they're attempting to torture individuals. And just because there is no biological deposition doesn't mean, and I'm going to be quite frank with you here, Vin, it doesn't mean that this individual did not have masturbatory fantasies at the scene and you wouldn't recover any ejaculate. So maybe there's not a sign of what would be defined classically as a sexual assault, forcible rape, but that doesn't exclude the possibility that he's fantasizing with these bodies.
Shavaun Scott, in so many cases, I was thinking about this today so much. Like, why kill these girls? Why kill these girls? What was the purpose behind all of this? The clothing is removed, but there's no charge of sexual assault. There's no charge of rape. There's no charge of molestation. There's no evidence for them to prove that. They found these girls a day later. But Joseph Scott Morgan painting a picture here of a clear sex crime. From your perspective, Shavaun, how do you see this crime scene and what happened to these girls and the mindset, the motivation behind the killer or killers?
Yeah, the first thing that popped into my mind when I read the details about the bizarre staging and the bodies and the clothing and everything that had happened, I'm thinking someone that's psychotic, because it really is in the bizarre category. And we like to put murderers in neat little boxes, but in truth, there's a lot of crossover. And so we have a category of killer called the visionary killer, who is often a psychotic person, and they see themselves as going on some kind of mission, and there's often a lot of ritual involved, sometimes strange religious rituals involved with their beliefs. And this is caused from a condition of psychosis where they're delusional, they have hallucinations, they have bizarre beliefs, and so they do these weird things. Although if you can sit down and interview that person and you can get them to talk to you, they can explain to you the meaning of those rituals and why they did what they did. But looking in from the outside, it just looks strange and makes no sense. So I thought, let me ask you this, though,
Shavaun. We know a little bit about Richard Allen. The guy was like, I don't know if he's an assistant manager, developed pictures, worked at CVS, was married, like was living a seemingly normal life. I don't know what else we know about his background, but does that fit? Does that fit what we're looking at here?
It certainly can, because psychotic conditions ebb and flow. And there are people who, you know, have a marginal lifestyle. They hold it together to some degree, but they have a very disturbed thought life, and sometimes they hide that from other people. So I've certainly seen many cases where people had a lot of bizarre ideation going on, they engaged in a lot of fantasy, but maybe people that were close to them weren't really aware of it because they kept that to themselves and they kept that private. And at some point, after years and years and years of fantasy, the opportunity arose, their brain condition had, let's say, gone in the wrong direction, and they acted out. The other thing I'll say about the sexual aspect to it, I agree with all the other comments, and we have to realize that when a person has a sexual sadistic bent to this fantasy, the violence is actually the erotic part for them. And so we often think that they have to commit a sexual act on the body for it to be erotic, but really they're fantasizing about the violence before the killing and after the killing, and that's what excites them.
A case like this strikes fear in our community because two innocent girls went on a hike and ended up brutally murdered in a strange, bizarre crime scene. Now, only the killer knows everything that happened that day and why it happened. And that's horrifying because there's nothing anyone can do to predict or prepare for this level of evil. So now we wait for the trial, we wait for the truth, and we wait for justice for Abby and Libby. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thanks for joining the investigation.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.